This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Wondery.
This is a mini meditation guided by Bombas. Repeat after me. I'm comfy. I'm cozy. I have 0 blisters on my toes. And that's because I wear Bombas, the softest socks, underwear, and t-shirts that give back. One purchased equals one donated. Now go to bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/Wondery and use code WONDERY at checkout.
The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive, where drivers who save by switching save over $700 on average. Quote now at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who save with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary.
In 1973, the New York City Police Department created a hostage negotiation team.
He's not up against the gun. He's up against the man's mind.
When you're defusing a human bomb, it's the same as when you're taking apart a real bomb. If you skip a step, it's going to blow up right in your face.
Talk to Me tells the high-stakes true story of the world's first hostage negotiation team. It changed policing forever. Talk to Me.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on The Prosecutors, when 2 children disappear, their mother tells the authorities they are safe. But when they're not found again, we're left to wonder, where are the Hoggle children? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my fructious co-host, Alice.
Hi, Brett. Fructious.
Yeah.
That sounds fruity? Does it have to do with fruit?
It means like bountiful. And,
like fruit.
Fulsome. Like fruit, exactly. But, in this case, we're not really going for fruit. That was Frank's. And he thought because you were because you add so much to the show that would be a good descriptor.
Thanks,
and I
Frank.
agree with him. So
Well, I am filled with my kids' Halloween candy because I don't let them eat it, which means it's sitting in my house and I'm the only one who eats it. So today I gave it all away. Finally.
Yeah. You gave it all away or you ate it all? Because that's different, Alice. Those are two different things.
You want to know what actually happened? So we have a wonderful neighbor who is the world's best neighbor, who is a pediatrician. And I asked him to come look at my kids' ears because I thought they might have ear infections. I just didn't want to drag them all the way across town. And he did. And like a country doctor payment, I gave him all of my Halloween candy.
There you go. 2 chickens and some Reese's cups. That's what a doctor goes for these days.
It's inflation, man. It's not just one Reese's cup.
Your money ain't worth anything, so you might as well.
Oh, Brett, we've been recording a lot, but I've kind of missed the Prosecutors podcast storytelling because we've been trying to move quickly with the Delphi updates in our other podcast, Legal Briefs. And people who do like 24-hour cycle news, they're something else. It is a tough world to try to keep up with and produce content for real life, on the spot analysis. So I'm kind of glad we're going back to storytelling for a little bit.
I agree. I don't know how they do it. I admire them. It's not for me. I like you. I enjoy this more in-depth research, storytelling type thing that we do, which is not to say we won't keep doing it. I mean, it's fun in a different way, but and those of you who enjoy Legal Briefs, I mean, you like that kind of stuff. And we're going to try and stay on top of the news, but I think it is good to dig into these cases that aren't breaking and, in fact, need more attention. And this is one of them that we're going to talk about today. We've had some fun at the beginning of the podcast. This is a really sad story that we're going to talk about today. And it's one that's not very well known, and it's really coming to a head right now. So we wanted to talk about this case. I want to thank Mandy for bringing this case to our attention. This is not a case that I really knew anything about until she suggested we look at it. And once we looked at the details, we thought, this is definitely a case we wanted to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. And as soon as we tell you the story, unfortunately, the facts are incredibly sad, but we don't know what happened. And with your help and maybe some breaks in the case, we will know, and we can find out some more for the sake of some sweet, sweet children. So let's take us back a little bit. In 2014, Troy and Catherine Hoggle were doing their best to raise 3 children despite real difficulties. You see, Catherine had long suffered from serious mental illness, to the extent that she'd been committed to a medical facility in the past. Still, everyone agreed that she loved her children. She had 3 children: Sarah, who was age 3, Jacob, who was 2 years old, and she also had an older son who we're not going to name here in order to protect his privacy. So, with these challenges that Catherine was facing, Troy was also trying to do his best to give those kids a stable home. Now, even though Troy and Catherine's relationship had long since ended, he and Catherine still lived together, doing what was best for the children. It seemed like it was working too. And, we see this often where maybe a marriage or a relationship falls apart, but for the sake of the kids, people stay in the same household or co-parent, and they're doing it out of, really sacrificial love for their kids. And this is exactly what was happening in this household until September 2014, when Catherine did something horrible, though exactly what remains a mystery to this day.
Yeah, and this is one of those cases that I'm surprised it's not more well covered than it is. If you guys look on your podcast app, you're not going to see a lot of podcasts about this. There are a few videos out there, but it's just there's not as much there. And I think one of the reasons is, as you're going to see, there's a lot of mystery here that is really difficult to uncover. And we're going to talk a lot about Catherine. We're going to talk a lot about her mental illness, but we want everyone to keep their focus also on Sarah and Jacob. And as we sort of talk through this, I mean, this has been a while. 2014, that was 8 years ago. That's a long time. But as we always say, one of the reasons we like to cover these cases, because there's always some hope that someone will have seen something. This case takes place in Montgomery County, Maryland. If you live in that area, and if you lived in that area in 2014, I hope you'll pay close attention to the details here, because this is one of those things where someone definitely saw something. They may not have known at the time what they saw. But I've got to think that even though it's been 8 years, if you did see something, it probably was strange. It was probably a weird thing that might actually have stuck out to you. Not enough maybe that you would realize what you saw. But hopefully, as we talk through this, if you are one of those people, and this jogs a memory, I hope that you will contact someone, because Sarah and Jacob, we need to bring them home. Whatever the circumstances are going to be, we need to bring them home. Let's go back to 2013. So let's step back just a little bit further. Now, Catherine, as Alice said, her entire life she has struggled with mental illness all the way when she was a child. And as she got older, it became clear that she had some serious issues. She was diagnosed as schizophrenic. And in fact, in August of 2013, she will be involuntarily committed. This is one of those things you don't think about that much anymore. In the past, this used to happen a lot. And this is a civil commitment. It's not a criminal commitment. It's not that she's been arrested and she's been found to be dangerous and therefore she's locked away in some sort of secure medical facility, maybe at a prison. It's not that at all. This is when the family becomes so concerned that they make the move to have a loved one committed. It used to be pretty easy to do, and in fact, it was abused quite a bit. Now it's pretty difficult. And the fact that Catherine was committed just goes to show this is not a joke here. She had some serious issues, and she was trying to deal with them. Not only was she schizophrenic, but there was a fear that she was possibly suicidal. So that's in August of 2013. Let's fast forward to September of 2014. By that time, a year later, Sarah's been released from the hospital. She's first moved into a group home, so less restrictive than the hospital setting, but still a setting in which she is constantly supervised, in which she's going to be interacting with doctors a lot. She's going to be taking medication, and people are going to make sure that she takes that medication. But at some point, we move, first from the hospital to the group home. Now she's going to move out of the group home, and she's going to move back in with Troy, her children's father. And as Alice said, the thought was she's doing better. She's never been seen as a danger to the children. So let's bring her back into the home. She's now out of the group home, but now she's going to a day treatment program. So essentially, the family wakes up in the morning. The kids are sort of taken care of and sent wherever they need to go. And then Catherine's going to this day program where she stays for the day, she continues her treatment, and then she comes home. Everybody's helping out. Her parents who are divorced, they're helping out. Everybody is trying to make sure that the kids are taken care of. And in fact, even though she's on medication, and even though she's attending this day treatment program and everything seems to be going fine, she's still not to be left alone with any of her 3 children. The reason for this isn't necessarily that it was believed Catherine would be an overt danger to her children. It was more that if Catherine became delusional, she might do something that was dangerous to the children without even realizing it. So the idea was make sure she's never alone with her kids, and that's what everybody had sort of enforced. And you had Sarah and you had Jacob and you had her 6-year-old son. But as with most things, while at first the family was very strict and they really followed through on this, over time, the family, particularly her parents, become more and more lax with enforcing this rule. And the reason was simple. Yes, Catherine had issues, but she had always been good with her children. And you won't talk to anybody who talked to you about this case who won't agree that even though she still was suffering from these issues, the treatment was working and she was getting better.
Now, on September 7th, Catherine is at her father's house with her children. And at around 4 p.m., she asks to borrow her dad's car to take Jacob to get pizza. She says she has a coupon for a free pizza at Pizza Hut. At 6 p.m., Catherine, so her dad lets her. This is part of the kind of the rules getting more lax. She seems like she's doing well. Everyone's having a good time. It's kind of the middle of the day, getting later. And, what harm is there in taking Jacob to go get some pizza, a fun outing with his mom? And so she goes with her father's car to supposedly Pizza Hut with Jacob. Now, just a couple hours later at 6 p.m., Catherine returns to her parents' house, but she doesn't have Jacob and she doesn't have pizza. She told her dad that she'd left Jacob at a friend's house for a sleepover. Now, despite the fact that Jacob was only 2 years old, her dad believed her. At 9:30 p.m., her father dropped Catherine and her 2 other children off at Troy's house. Now, around midnight that night, Catherine sends Troy on errands that require him to go to several different stores, so he didn't get home until quite late. Troy returns home and notices that Jacob's not in his bed in the main bedroom, but he just assumes that Jacob's sleeping with one of his siblings, which would not be out of the ordinary. And he doesn't want to wake his kids, so he just leaves it be.
And this was unusual for him. So Troy, he works second shift, so 3 to 11. For those of you who've never done shift work, 3 to 11, he comes home and what he normally does is he checks in on his kids. He wants to see his kids. They're already asleep. But all of you out there who are working parents, you've experienced this. You just want to see your kids before you go to bed. But when he gets home, like Alice said, Catherine's got all these errands she wants him to run all of a sudden. She wants some food from McDonald's, and she wants him to go to this store and go to this store. And so he does it. And so when he gets home, it's so late, and he's so tired, and he knows the kids are asleep, and he doesn't want to risk waking them up, that he doesn't look in on them. And he regrets this to this day for obvious reasons, though it's pretty clear. And this is an interesting thing. So one of the big issues, to give you some foreshadowing of what we're going to talk about here, one of the big issues is Catherine competent to stand trial for whatever she did? The kids, as we said in the beginning, they are going to go missing. And the question is what happened to them, and the assumption is Catherine did something to them. But because of these mental issues, she's been sort of bouncing around for a long time. This is a 2014 case. To this day, it has not gone to trial. So that gives you an idea of how complicated this is. But when you're thinking about this, you're thinking about mental illness. You're thinking about whether somebody's competent. You're thinking about whether somebody can assist their counsel. And we'll get into what the standard is for a second. But when you read something like this, what does it make you think? So she took Jacob for quote-unquote pizza at 4 o'clock, comes back at 6, lies to her parents about where he is, gets dropped off, and then what does she do? She knows what Troy's habits are. She knows that he's going to look in on the kids. So what does she do? She delays him even longer. This is a really savvy thing to do, because in doing that, it means he doesn't see that Jacob, in fact, is not in his brother's bed.
And that's really interesting because she assesses that though her father has bought her excuse that a 2-year-old is at a sleepover, she knows enough that Troy isn't going to buy that story. At least that's what this is appearing like. So even though, sometimes we see people who lie in our cases get emboldened when their lie succeeds on one person and they think it'll work again. But here, at least there's enough kind of consciousness to recognize that different people will believe different things. So
the next morning, September 8th, Troy wakes up at about 7:15, and when he does, he realizes that Sarah is not there. His older son gets up and asks him where Jacob is. And he says, I thought he was in bed with you. So now he realizes that Jacob wasn't in his own bed. He wasn't in bed with the older son. And Sarah, his daughter, is also not at home. So, of course, he goes looking for Catherine. As we said, their relationship was basically over. So Catherine slept in one room, he slept in the other. So he didn't realize that, in fact, Catherine's not there either. At some point before he woke up, she had slipped out. The first thing he does is he looks for his keys in his wallet. He notices they are missing. So he figures Catherine has gone somewhere with the kids. He calls Catherine's cell phone, but then he hears it ring because her cell phone is sitting on the table. She has decided not to take her cell phone with her. At this point, he calls Catherine's mom. She says she's not there either. Remember, mom and dad are divorced. He then calls Catherine's dad to see if they are with him. He says no, and for reasons that are unclear, neglects to mention that Jacob supposedly is sleeping over with a friend. So now Troy is really concerned, but he has his other son he has to take care of. And you can only imagine what this must have been like. He has to get him ready for school. So with all the sort of concerns running through his head, he's getting his son ready for school. He gets him on the bus. And then as soon as his son is taken care of and he's on the bus, he calls 911. It's not that he thought Catherine would do anything to the kids. He didn't think she would necessarily hurt them. In fact, that never went through his head that she would hurt them. But he was very concerned that she could have had some sort of schizophrenic episode, and who knows what she's doing. She's not supposed to be driving. That's one of the things. So even the fact that she's driven the car is a problem. She's certainly not supposed to be alone with the kids. And you can go ahead and bet that if she is alone with the kids in the car, they're probably not in their car seats, right? I mean, there's all sorts of dangers running through his head. So he calls 911. But literally, as he's on the phone with 911, his car drives up and there's Catherine. So he actually is on the phone with the operator. He puts her on speaker. And he goes up to Catherine and he's like, what in the world? Where are the kids? And she tells him that she woke up early and she took both Sarah and Jacob to a daycare center in Germantown. Because Troy didn't know the story that she had told to her father, he didn't realize that that should have been a red flag. In fact, they had been thinking about where they were going to put their kids, thinking about different daycare programs they would use. And he just thought she's doing the sort of thing where you drop your kids off for the day and sort of try it out. That's what he thinks is happening. And it's consistent with conversations they've had. So he believes her and he tells the 911 operator it's a false alarm. He gets very mad at his wife after he hangs up, says, don't ever do that again. You know you're not supposed to do that. But at the end of the day, he forgives her. And he takes her to her day treatment program.
So now it's 2:00, 2 in the afternoon, and Troy assumes everything's fine because, he kind of got a little scared in the morning, but he did all the right steps, right? He took care of his older son. He called everyone to see where Catherine was. And then Catherine told him everything was fine. This was something that they were looking at for daycares, and she knows she's not supposed to be alone with the kids, but remember, over time, the family has become more lax. But at about 2 p.m., Troy gets a call from his mom that she's been going from daycare to look for the kids, and she can't find them. Troy picks up Catherine from the program and suggests that they go pick up the children. He also wants to see this daycare that Catherine is trying out. Now, Catherine says she can't remember the name of the place, but she will direct him to it. Now, traffic is terrible in the area, Washington, D.C. traffic, you can imagine, and it takes them till 3:30 to even get close. But by that point, they had to pick up their oldest child, and it takes them another hour to turn around and get down Highway 118 in order to pick up their older son, and by this point, it is 4:30 p.m. Now, they are driving down 355, which is the road that Catherine says the daycare is on. And Catherine tells Troy to keep going until they've left Germantown and gotten into Gaithersburg. They make a U-turn, and now Catherine says she doesn't know what street it's on, what the address is, or what the phone number is. Now, Troy meets with her mom and drops off his oldest son. And Catherine starts freaking out and saying she doesn't trust her mom with her son. And Troy finally just asks, where are my kids? Catherine refuses to say, and then she names another daycare. But the children aren't there either. Troy starts driving to the police station, and Catherine asks where they're going, and he tells Catherine that he's going to the police. She then says, Bethesda Church Road Daycare, and says she needs a drink to stay awake given her medication. Catherine asks Troy if they can stop at a Chick-fil-A so she can get a drink, which he complies with. So they walk in together, and she asks to use Troy's phone to call her mom. Catherine goes to the bathroom, comes out, hands him his phone, orders a Dr. Pepper, and as they walk out, she says she's going to get a refill. Troy goes back to the car, but Catherine never comes out. She slipped out the side door and disappeared. That was a lot.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, it's just you can imagine this, and I hate to use words like crazy and insane, given that we're talking about mental illness, but an insane couple of hours where in the middle of this sort of area of Maryland, which, as Alice said, is kind of a suburb of D.C., and the traffic is just atrocious. If you ever lived in that area, it's a reason not to live there. And over the course of these couple hours, they're driving up and down these roads. They're going from daycare to daycare. She's pointing out daycares where it is. Troy's going inside and saying, hey, I'm here to pick up my son. And the people are like, what are you talking about?
Which, by the way, is like, can you imagine all those daycare workers? Because who would forget where they put their kids? You know, it's not every day that someone would come into your daycare center and not just ask for their kids, but like ask, are my kids here?
Yeah, you would almost, I'm surprised they didn't call the police and say there's some guy walking around trying to
looking for
pick
kids.
up a kid. Right, exactly. So, and then, you have this, sometimes when you read this story, this really doesn't make sense to you because it's easy to question in hindsight a lot of the things that Troy and everybody else does because Catherine's doing weird things and you feel like red flags should be coming up. But those of you who've lived with somebody who've had a family member who's dealt with this kind of mental illness, at some point, you figure out just how to go with it and you work with them and you sort of let them have some of their delusions. I mean, some of you who've had, parents or grandparents who have Alzheimer's, a lot of times you kind of go with it. You learn to adapt. And I think that is kind of where they were at. And like I said, they just didn't think she would hurt the kids. So they thought, wow, what a stupid thing to do. You drop the kids off and you have no idea where you dropped them off, right? But nobody's thinking she didn't drop them off. They're just thinking they're at some daycare, one of the 1,000 daycares in this area. Because everybody who's commuting, whether they're commuting down to Washington or going somewhere else, they're dropping their kids off at daycare, they're picking them up. There are so many places these kids could be. She's on this medication, which really causes issues with her blood sugar, really makes it difficult for her to stay awake. So when you read it sometimes, you read the story and it's like, the kids disappeared, he decided to go to the police, but then he stopped at the Chick-fil-A. And you're like, why would you stop at the Chick-fil-A? That just seems crazy, right? But in reality, it all made sense because she needs something to kind of keep her going as they are on their way to pick up the kids who are going to be at this Bethesda Church Road daycare. So now he's thinking, oh, we're going to find the kids. But then she slips out the side door. Obviously, the kids are not at the daycare. And at this point, he calls the police again, and the search is on for her. Now, this, as I said, is September 8th. On September 9th, early in the morning, around 4:30 a.m., a surveillance camera will catch Catherine walking down Highway 118 between the area of Interstate 270 and Germantown Commons, if you know that area. We're giving you these names of the streets. I have no idea where any of this is, and I think a lot of people don't. But once again, if you're around in September 2014 and you lived in this area, these are the places that she was at this time. The children are not with her. She will later be seen entering a public building, and it is believed that she spent the night in the restroom of that building. That's September 9th. So the police now, they're putting out public statements. Everybody's looking for her. Everybody's looking for the kids. Everybody assumes, once again, that the kids are fine, but everybody's looking for them. They don't find her until September 12th. So on September 12th at 11:18 p.m., a Germantown resident calls into the police to report that they have seen Catherine wandering the streets. The police eventually pick her up. They do so without incident. This is just creepy. So obviously Troy, his friends, grandparents, they're out looking for the kids. They're putting up missing posters with pictures of the children. In fact, they have a picture, and one of the pictures that we're going to put on the website and on YouTube if you're watching it is from that day, the day they disappeared. They have these pictures. They're putting up flyers. When the police arrest Catherine, they open up her purse, and what do they find? They find that it is filled with flyers from the missing kids. So she had been going behind her family members and taking down the flyers that they are putting up.
Oh, goodness gracious. I mean, again, keep all this in mind because one of the questions we raised earlier is whether she's competent to stand trial and also whether she was competent at the time of the disappearances.
Right. And she obviously seems like she's acting with intention here. She also has done something else that people do when they're acting with intention. She has changed her appearance. She's cut her hair. She's altered her appearance. She is still wearing the same clothes as on the day she disappeared, but presumably that's because she just didn't have any clothes to change into. She tells the police that the kids are safe, but she will not reveal where they are. She will eventually tell the police that she left the kids with a friend named Aaron in Bethesda. There is no Aaron in Bethesda. that anybody can find. This is the Zanny the nanny of this case. This person doesn't exist. So then she leads police to a playground and says she dropped the kids off there. But there's no evidence of them ever found. And remember, one thing that's interesting about this, unlike what she told Troy, she did not take the kids together. She took Jacob one day, then the next day, or that night at least, she takes Sarah. So even if she did drop them off at the playground, she would have done it at a totally different time. And as I said, there is no evidence that they were ever at that playground.
And anyways, you can see every time she's asked, she says somewhere different. It's a different daycare, and she's even able to name different daycares. She, says a friend's house for Jacob to her father. She's naming an errand in Bethesda. I mean, she's kind of just spitting out places. Bethesda, it's in Maryland, but she's in Germantown, like in Gaithersburg, which is not exactly next door to Bethesda. Query whether she even went to Bethesda often. And then all within this, it's unclear how these stories are supposed to fit together about the playground. Like, did she meet Aaron at the playground, or did she leave them there and then, forget the Aaron story? But again, this is typical for someone who is suffering from mental illness and how they may answer questions, except in this case, we really are missing children. Now, on September 13th in the morning, both Troy and Catherine's father talked to Catherine. Police also interview Catherine for 15 hours. And despite talking to her for that long, she gives them nothing. In fact, she acts like nothing is wrong at all. Over the next few days, police scour areas that Catherine had known to be or known to visit. They used an army of volunteers and 8 canine teams, but no trace of the children is found. I mean, this is a nearly impossible search because there's so much geography that has to be covered, and there's literally no lead because the only lead you can get would be from Catherine, and she's already given so many different stories and furthermore is acting like there's no problem at all. So usually when there's like a missing child case, there's at least something like we know at what time and from where they left or where they were last seen. We don't have any of that here. Now, soon after Catherine was arrested, it became clear that Catherine had mental issues like we've already talked about, and Catherine was taken to the Clifton T. Perkins Hospital Center, a maximum security psychiatric hospital in Jessup, Maryland. Now, this can happen in cases, it's not criminal confinement because you haven't been adjudicated to be convicted of a crime, but still you are being held. You're not free to leave as long as you've been deemed incompetent, and you can be admitted into a hospital that's also a prison in a sense. They don't call it that because it's a treatment center, but you are not free to leave, and it's not open to the public to go get treatment. It is for the very purpose of treating people who are awaiting trial or charged with a crime. Now, when she's there, doctors deem her not competent to stand trial. So there's 2 different competencies. There's competencies to stand trial, which is just, do you understand the charges against you? And if you don't, we say that you cannot face trial because you don't understand what's happening. And then there's, of course, competency or insanity at the time of the committing of the act. Those are 2 different things. So doctors here are just saying at this time, right now, she's not competent to stand trial. She does not understand the charges. She doesn't understand what's going on around her to be an advocate for herself. Now, at first, Catherine is charged with a misdemeanor, which under Maryland law allowed her to be held for 3 years. It's a pretty long time. 3 years later, in September of 2017, so fast forward, she's confined this entire time because she's been deemed incompetent and is not found to be competent within those 3 years to stand trial. But during that time, the charges change. In September 2017, Catherine is now charged with 2 counts of murder. From that point forward, the prosecution had roughly 5 years to bring her to competency. And by the way, we'll talk more about this, but this was a source of controversy. And that 5 years to bring her to competency to stand trial for double murder will run at the end of this year, which is why we said at the beginning of this case, this is an important time in the case because time is about to run out for her to be able to be deemed competent to stand trial. Now, throughout her time at the hospital, every doctor who has examined her has found Catherine to be incompetent. She tells her doctors that the children are safe. But beyond that, through all of these years, she refuses to reveal what happened to them.
And before the end of this episode, we're going to talk about incompetency and what it means, because this is probably confusing to a lot of you who are not in this area. It's ironic. I had a competency hearing today, as a matter of fact. So this is something that you deal with a lot if you're a prosecutor. You see this a lot. There are a lot of people out there who commit crimes who have mental illness. There's an argument to be made that a lot of crimes are committed because of mental illness. And when you have that, there are two different things. One is, you are legally insane at the time you commit the crime. That's a defense at trial. But you can be legally sane at the time you commit the crime. But if you are incompetent to stand trial, which, like I said, we're going to talk about it, so don't worry, then you may not make it to trial, even if everyone agrees you were sane at the time of the trial. And that's the circumstance you're facing here, where the doctors are looking at her and they're saying, under the standard, the legal standard, which we're going to discuss, she's not competent. And since she's not competent, she can't be tried. Well, Maryland has this rule that you can hold people who are incompetent and you're attempting to restore them to competency. You're hoping that through treatment, because remember, it's not that they're not culpable for their crime. It's not that they were insane at the time of the crime. It's that they can't go through the process of trial. So if you can restore them to competency through medication or treatment or counseling or whatever, if you can get them back to being competent, you can then try them. So Maryland's got this law. If you're charged with a misdemeanor, you can be held for 3 years, which, as Alice said, it's crazy because the most you can be sentenced to for a misdemeanor is a year. Felony is a year and a day. Misdemeanor, the most you can get is a year. So it's kind of crazy that they can hold you for 3 years while trying to get you back to competent so that they can then convict you and sentence you to at most a year. But in any event, they can do that.
And here's an interesting thing about that. Usually when you're held in custody pending a trial, you're waiting trial, you're sitting in jail, sometimes your sentence can include something called time served. In other words, the time that you spent sitting in jail waiting to be tried can count towards like credit for your sentence because you were already confined. When you're held for incompetency reasons, those 3 years don't count towards anything of a sentence if you're ever convicted and sentenced. So if she were then convicted of a misdemeanor and let's say the sentence was 11 months and 29 days or something like that, just under a year, and she's already been held for 3 years, doesn't matter. She has to start at day one in terms of serving her sentence.
Exactly. If she had been held in the local jail while waiting for the trial to happen, that time would count against her sentence. So it's an interesting law, and you can see why it's controversial, and you can see why the next thing the prosecution did was also controversial. As soon as that time ran out, they charged her with a felony, which has a 5-year time limit. And her defense attorneys were like, you can't do that. You can't stack them like that. Maybe you get 2 more years, but you don't get 5 more years. And this actually was litigated in Maryland, and the decision was, no, you can do that. So that turned out to be correct, and that's what's happened. Very soon, within a month or so, they're going to have another hearing, and it's going to be a final competency hearing. And if at that time, Catherine's found not to be competent to stand trial, then under this law, she will have to be released. We'll talk about that some more in a second. But that's a reason that now is really a good time, if you know anything about this case, to come forward, because there's a lot of things you look at when you're talking about competency. And things that she's doing at the time could go towards whether or not she's competent or not, or whether she's doing something called malingering, which we've talked about before, which is when you kind of fake it. And there's evidence that she's faking it. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So let's talk about her mental state at the time of the disappearance. We've talked about this a little bit earlier, but it is kind of bizarre that this happened when it did, because there was no indication that she was having mental issues. It is unanimous between everybody who knew her, and a lot of them don't like each other very much after everything that happened. But they all agree that Catherine seemed like she was getting better. She wasn't hallucinating. She wasn't forgetful. She wasn't doing strange things. Everything seemed to be fine. And everybody agreed that, in fact, she was getting better. So when you look at this case, you don't see what you expect. You would expect sort of gradually worsening behavior that ended up with this event. But that is not what you see. You do not see that at all. It's as if this event just sort of sprang out of nothingness, that it just happened when it happened for no apparent reason. If you really dig into it, maybe you start to see some reasons, but they don't seem to be related to mental health. And I think that's important when we're talking about competency. Because if it seemed like she was what we call decompensating, which is when you go from competent to sort of in the depths of a mental illness and become incompetent to stand trial and maybe insane for the purposes of the insanity defense, you will see signs of that. And we don't see that here. And I think that is pretty significant. The Prosecutors is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to The Prosecutors, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more.
So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. Guys, with the holidays coming up, I am always pulling my hair out trying to think of good holiday gifts to give my kids that'll keep them excited for more than a day after they open it. Well, KiwiCo knows a thing or two about delivering fun for all ages, and they're here to help you give awesome. With a KiwiCo subscription, you're giving so much more than a toy. They'll get a season of discovery and experiences delivered straight to their door. And each box is kid approved by a crew of kid testers to ensure they're age appropriate and seriously fun. Guys, this is an amazing subscription box. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and they are constantly entertained with what gets sent to them through KiwiCo.
Yeah, Alice, my kids love KiwiCo. We got the armadillo bowling set, which may not sound educational, but it actually is. My daughter loves it, and she's learning so much about armadillos and all their little critter friends that run around with them. And you guys know this. Kids love to learn. They may not know it, but they love to learn. And if you can engage their creativity, if you can engage their curiosity, they're not only going to enjoy what they're doing, they're going to learn while they're doing it. And that's where KiwiCo comes in. Each box features new projects every month, like discovering the science of magic, engineering a domino machine, and more. I promise you, your kids are going to love it. And now you can give awesome this holiday season with KiwiCo. Get your first month of any crate line free at KiwiCo.com/prosecutors. This is a deal you cannot beat. That's your first month free at KiwiCo. That's KiwiCo.com/prosecutors. Alice, with inflation the way it is, we've all been looking for ways to cut back. We've all been looking for ways to save money. And I got to tell you, one way I do that is with Upside. If I need gas, the first thing I do is open up my Upside app and see if there are any gas stations nearby that are working with Upside. I'm looking at you, Circle K, because I am buying gas there and saving money. You can do that too. Upside is an incredible app for anyone who buys gas, groceries, or dines out, which I'm gonna guess is all of us. And with Upside, you won't have to cut back because you will get cash back on every purchase.
And it's so easy. To get started, download the free Upside app. Use our promo code PROSECUTE and get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. Next, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. Check in at the business, pay as usual with a credit or debit card, and then you get paid. In comparison to credit card rewards or loyalty programs, you can earn 3 times more cash back with Upside. And Upside users are earning more than $1 million every week. That's probably why they have a 4.8 star rating on the App Store. Download the free Upside app and use promo code PROSECUTE to get $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more. That's $5 or more cash back on your first purchase of $10 or more using promo code PROSECUTE. You know, talking about not seeing signs of worsening mental health in the days, weeks, months leading up to the disappearance. Look at the conduct of her family, the way they were treating her. They were giving her more leeway from the stringent rules that they originally set for her. You know, she took Troy's car the morning that it was discovered the kids were missing, and she wasn't supposed to be driving. That's why she didn't have a car. She wasn't supposed to be driving with the kids. And kind of there was no repercussion because she was good enough. You know, she was up at a place where it didn't make sense to discipline her, say, you know, you can never have that car anymore. They had gotten to a place where she was essentially, you know, good enough to be able to drive. And that's why both Troy his car was taken, but, you know, she had driven his car. She had driven her dad's car. She was trusted out kind of in society, even on her own, even if she wasn't quite supposed to be there yet.
So that brings us to Catherine's parents. They have sort of an interesting view on this. They claim to believe that the children are alive and that they have been taken by some sort of organization that helps kids who've been abused that possibly Catherine reached out to, fed this organization some sort of line, and then they kind of spirited the kids away to a, you know, better life. One of the reasons they believe this is because Catherine had apparently Googled Scientology at one point, and the family believes that Scientology is somehow involved in this. The Scientology took the kids for some purpose. It's one of those things that would be nice if it were true. I mean, the ideal situation would be somehow these kids end up alive somewhere. That would be great. Don't know how much I believe that. There's always been speculation that somehow Catherine's family is involved in this, since they were there when the children were taken, particularly Catherine's father. He has taken a polygraph, though, and passed, and I think this is like so many things in true crime. People point fingers at people. It's easy to blame Catherine's parents because her father sort of let her go off with one of the kids, and then they never told anybody about this. But I don't think there's any involvement of the parents in anything that happened to the kids.
Yeah, and the fact that they kind of maintain, or, you know, they think that the kids are still alive actually is something that a lot of true crime communities do, where we want to hope that the missing person is actually living their best life in some tropical place and they just wanted to get away from the old life that they led, because that's such a better outcome for the, you know, supposed victim. Here, these are their grandkids. They love their grandkids. They spent a lot of time caring for them. They spent time with them. They lived close by. You know, I don't fault them for wanting to believe that those grandkids are still alive and hanging on to the hope that the fact Catherine has never said otherwise, that they are harmed or hurt or anything, that she's always maintained that they are safe. I can see why they want to hold on to that hope that, you know, even if those kids are not here, they're okay somewhere. And the fact that her parents are around may just be that they are people that she was around often because they cared for her in addition to her children. You know, it's not just their grandchildren that are missing. Their daughter is at the center of all of this. And, you know, the kind of tragedy of it all from the grandparents' perspective, if they're not involved, I think it really can't be overstated. A huge question when you hear the story is, was this planned, and why that particular time? Why in September when things seem to be going well? Well, there's no obvious trigger here. Catherine was in a day program where she'd stay for 6 hours a day and would receive medication. She hadn't just transitioned there. You know, this was a next step from the hospital confinement. So this was a good step towards, you know, total independence in managing her mental health. And there was also no indication that she was a danger to the children, even when the kids disappeared. That's why it kind of took some time before Troy and her parents jumped into action, because there was just absolutely not even a thought in the world that she would do anything to harm her kids. Usually in situations of child abuse, we see escalations, even if family members didn't know. There are indications that come out afterwards. Family members note that they'd seen bruises before, or they have a third son here who is actually older and more communicative than the younger two children who have disappeared, who could have seen things, who could say things, who could have been treated in the same manner. But, none of that was really coming out to say that Catherine was a danger to her children. And that made it seem as though this was maybe planned, because it kind of came out of nowhere. Moreover, Catherine sent Troy on those errands the night that Jacob went missing. So Jacob wasn't in the home at that point, and she knew that, and Troy was coming home. And to maybe buy more time, or maybe buy time to take, her daughter away. Maybe the plan was to take all 3 kids away. It's not clear, but she did send Troy on errands, which was not a nightly event, especially because he was coming home so late. There's only so many stores open at that hour. And it seems that was intentionally planned so that he would get home so late, that he'd be so tired from his night shift and the errands, that he wouldn't really check on the children before going to bed, buying a few more hours for her. Now, remember the morning that Troy woke up and realized that Catherine and her 2 younger children were gone? He called her cell phone, but she had left it on the counter. She didn't take it with her. Now, was that just because she forgot, she didn't need her phone, she just put it down? Or was it because she didn't want to be traced? We've talked about how phones, even if you're not calling anyone, if it's on, it can ping towers and it can show the location of the holder of the phone. Now, we know that when she left that morning, it was likely Sarah had been with her in the car, because we know she was in the house the night before, but was gone by the next morning. So we know that when she took Sarah, Catherine didn't have her phone on her. And it's likely that she didn't have her phone on her either when she took Jacob, because she was, remember, just going to get a quick pizza. That one is a little bit more confusing, Brett, because taking Sarah in the morning, you actually, there's more like, there's a whole night that goes by, because it could have been done early. It could have been midnight. It could have been even earlier than that. It could have been right after she put the kids to bed, before Troy got home, that Sarah was gone. We have no idea when Sarah was gone. There's a very long kind of time span that could have happened. But with Jacob, she had a very short amount of time, from basically 4 to 6 at her father's home, because she had to return the car to her father, and her father had to take them home. So he would have known right away that Jacob was gone. I just find that interesting in terms of that's a tightly wound lie right there.
And there's a couple things about this. Number one, when you look at all this stuff together, this is so premeditated. It's just leaving the phone so she couldn't be traced, the pizza excuse, the excuse that he's staying at a friend's house, sending Troy on all these errands, the story about the child daycare center. I mean, all of this evidences someone who is planning something and carrying out that plan. And I'm not saying she doesn't have mental issues, but as we're going to talk about with competency, you can have severe mental issues and be competent. You can have severe mental issues and not be legally insane. And I think all these things are really important. That's the first thing. The second thing, it feels like this is impossible to solve, because I've never seen a case with less evidence than this. It's as if when Catherine left those places, she put on an invisibility cloak, because no one saw her, and there's no trace of the kids ever found by anybody. We talked about all those dog teams they had. And yet, with Jacob, she's only gone for 2 hours. So wherever she took him had to be in a pretty close radius of that home, somewhere that she could go, do whatever she did, and get back in 2 hours. And I've got to think that whatever happened to Sarah was probably happened in the same place. So even though we don't know when Sarah went, and that would mean there's a lot more options, I really feel like if you found Jacob, you'd find Sarah. And if you found whatever happened to Jacob, you would find where whatever happened to Sarah. And it's interesting that that's such a tight radius, and yet no trace is ever found.
And that's a really great point, because at least with Jacob, we know it was during daylight hours, sometime between 4 and 6. And that would be a strange sight to see, seeing a 2-year-old be left somewhere. And you would expect that 2-year-old, at least that's the case with my 2-year-old, if I turned even my back on him and didn't even take a step away, he starts screaming for me, because it's evolutionary. A 2-year-old knows they cannot be alone. That's why they freak out when they are alone. When you start walking away from them, they want to be held. They want to be close to you for survival purposes. So that would have caused a racket if she had tried to leave Jacob and he was fully conscious and aware of what was going on. You would expect that would have caused a scene as she walked away, or someone would have noticed something strange in broad daylight when a 2-year-old is left by themselves.
And what does that tell you? It tells you that she thought through this enough that wherever she left him, whatever she did with him, was a place where nobody would be, which is further evidence of planning. There was a dry run at some point with this. She had thought about this enough that she knew of a place she could take the kids and do whatever she was going to do with them, and no one would see and no one would notice. That's not just random. She didn't drive around in those 2 hours and just luck upon somewhere. I mean, I think she planned all of this. And I think that's really important when we get into competence. Let's go ahead and talk about that. So in Dusky versus United States, this 1960 Supreme Court case, it's the first Supreme Court case that really set out the standard for competency to stand trial. This had been something, like so many things, that had been bouncing around the states for a while. There were all these different standards, and eventually it kind of coalesced into one. And generally the court found that when a judge is looking at this question, they have to determine, quote, whether the defendant has sufficient present ability to consult with his lawyer with a reasonable degree of rational understanding, and whether he has rational as well as factual understanding of proceedings against him. And it is not enough that he is oriented to time and place and has some recollection of events. So you have to be able to assist your lawyer. And that may seem a little strange, but your lawyer represents you, but it's not as if you're an automaton or just a silent participant in your trial. You're not. You're assisting counsel. You're helping them evaluate evidence. If there are other explanations for evidence than what the prosecution's suggesting, you can tell that to your counsel. It's always, it's always interesting, because when you're in trial, oftentimes you'll have a piece of evidence and you'll have your theory of what it means. But the defendant knows what it means. And so if you're wrong about your theory, that gives the defendant a huge advantage, because he can tell his lawyer, they think that document means that. But in fact, it doesn't. Like, say there's some cash. There's a large cash deposit in somebody's account. And the prosecution's up there saying, it's a bribe. Clearly it's a bribe. And the defendant turns to his counsel and says, I sold a boat that weekend. The guy wanted to pay in cash. That's where it comes from. His name's this. You can call him. He'll testify to that, right? That's a huge advantage for the defense, because prosecution didn't know that. And then all of a sudden, they're blowing a hole in your case. Well, you can't do that if you're incompetent. If you can't assist your counsel, you can't give them that kind of information. So this is something that is important, and being able to assist your counsel and being able to understand what's happening to you is really important. Importantly, competency can change. You might be competent to stand trial one day, then you decompensate, then you're no longer able to be competent. Then maybe you're given some therapy and you return to competency. I had a guy once who he would be sent off to a medical facility. He would become competent. They would send him back to stand trial. And by the time he got to the jurisdiction, he would be incompetent again. And this literally happened over and over again. They'd send him up to the hospital. He'd be fine. He'd come back down. By the time he got back down, he'd decompensate. And he was never competent long enough that he could actually stand trial. Competency is not the same as the insanity defense, as we said. And insanity defense asks if you were capable of telling right from wrong at the time of your crime. That's the question for the insanity defense. Competency is different. It is all about whether or not you are competent to stand trial at the time of trial. So as I said before, sane or insane when the crime is committed doesn't necessarily have anything to do with whether or not you are competent at the time of trial.
And that's why competency to stand trial is something that can change from time to time, because trial is something that is yet to happen. But the insanity defense, or being insane at the time, there's a finding. And then it's not something that changes. You could have experts or that, come out with different opinions as to whether you were insane at the time, but that's not a changing thing. You were insane at the time or you were not. And that's a factual challenge that is taken to trial. And that's an affirmative defense, by the way. You don't get to just dismiss your case based on the insanity defense, because by asserting insanity defense, you're not saying there's a defect in the indictment or the charging document. You're not saying you didn't do it. You're saying, if I did it, I don't know. Or you're actually saying, I did it. But when I did it, I had no idea what was going on, so I couldn't have violated the law. So it's really interesting because a lot of people say, oh, no, will the case get dismissed because they are asserting insanity? No, it's an affirmative defense that you have to bring at trial, and it is not a defect that leads to dismissal of the charges. Now, as the Supreme Court later explained in Drope versus Missouri, a case from 1975, it has long been accepted that a person whose mental condition is such that he lacks the capacity to understand the nature and object of the proceedings against him, to consult with counsel, and to assist in preparing his defense may not be subjected to a trial. Thus, Blackstone wrote that one who became, quote, mad after the commission of an offense should not be arraigned for it, because he is not able to plead to it with that advice and caution that he ought. Similarly, if he became mad after pleading, he should not be tried, for how can he make his defense? Some have viewed the common law prohibition as a byproduct of the ban against trials in absentia. The mentally incompetent defendant, though physically present in the courtroom, is in reality afforded no opportunity to defend himself. Now, that's saying exactly what Brett just told you, but kind of expounding upon it more and going into the philosophical question of as to why you can't try someone who is incompetent. Now, in this case, Catherine's case, the doctors who have looked at Catherine have found her to be incompetent. Every single one of them that have looked at her over the years have concluded that she is incompetent. But think about it this way. If I were to give you a test, a math test, and you always gave me the wrong answer, even if I knew you knew the answer, but you told me 4 plus 4 was 5, and then another day you told me 4 plus 4 was 85, and then the next day you told me 4 plus 4 was 7. I have to fail you on all of those tests, even if I think you are telling me the wrong answer on purpose, because the output of what you've given me leads to the wrong answer. And that can happen in the medical sense too. Catherine can do something called malinger and give all the inputs that would have to undoubtedly lead to a physician to find her incompetent. This happens even in jury selection. We'll have people who really want to get out of jury trial, and they'll say something like terribly racist. And I'm like, there is no way this person actually believes that. And we'll ask them follow-up questions like, do you really believe that? How long have you believed that? Could you put that aside to be fair? And they'll give us the exact answers that they know will get them out of trial duty. And even if we know that they're lying in order to get out of trial duty, we have to dismiss them because based on the answers they're giving us, the law says that that person cannot serve on the jury. And similar here, if Catherine knows the right answers to give and she is successfully malingering, it would be no surprise that every doctor that has examined her would have to conclude that she's incompetent. Now, you'll see these reports, Brett and I see a lot of these competency reports done by experts, and there usually is a section that talks about malingering. But even if they suspect malingering, they can note it and say, this is why we suspect there's malingering. If all the inputs lead you to believe the answer should be incompetency, you can state that you think they're malingering, but you probably still have to conclude in that report that they are incompetent. So Catherine has told family members that it is in her best interest to stay incompetent so as to avoid going to prison. I mean, talk about like a knowing statement and one that goes to malingering. The main concern seems to be with her ability to assist counsel. She appears only to have competency issues when she's talking about Sarah and Jacob. It is then that when she talks about her children that she becomes disconnected from reality. But is this really incompetency? Or is this a guilty person avoiding responsibility for what she did?
And one of the difficulties here is, and we talk about mental illness a lot, and I think in one episode I was talking about how if somebody broke their leg, you wouldn't say, oh, well, just think positive thoughts and you'll be fine. But we do that a lot with mental illness, and just talking about how sort of absurd that is. However, there is a caveat to that, and that is people, these having dealt with a lot of these psychologists who've done these examinations. One thing they will say to you is the person really needs to want to get better in order to get better. Like, they have to work at it. They have to try. They have to accept the counseling. It's often not, at least. I mean, forced medication is something you can do, and sometimes that works, but a lot of times it's either not enough or there's no medication that really treats the particular issue, and you really do need the person to submit themselves to mental health care. And here, there's two ways to look at this. The first is that Catherine is completely competent and she's faking it. The other is she's incompetent and she just has no interest in working towards competency, because obviously then she'll go to prison. And it's a really difficult situation that you're putting the judge in. Now, interestingly, the final say about competency is not the doctors. It is the judge. The judge is the one who will make this determination. Obviously, when you have a situation where every doctor who's ever looked at someone says they're incompetent, that is a difficult situation for the judge. There are a lot of jurisdictions where if you then found them competent, it is almost per se reversible if you have no medical evidence of their competency. Having said that, I think you could make a pretty good record here with everything we've talked about that she is competent despite what the doctors are saying, and just really hammer on the malingering thing. And I hope the judge does that. I hope the judge, because look, I mean, what's the downside? You try her, she's convicted. One day it's overturned, I mean, then you do it again, right? I mean, hopefully if she actually has to go to trial, she'll play ball. And at that point, she'll tell the real story, because she obviously has a real concern about spending the rest of her life in prison. So she might be willing to make a deal. And I think given her mental issues, I think the family probably would be willing to make that deal. Not to let her go, but not to necessarily spend the rest of her life in prison, which is what you would normally expect when you're charged with murdering 2 children, which is what she's charged with. There are obviously some countervailing concerns there. And I don't know, we're coming down to the moment. I mean, we're going to do a follow-up in a month or so where we'll tell you exactly how this went down, because it's going to happen soon. A couple questions that are probably running through your head. If the case is dismissed, what happens then? Well, this is not a jeopardy situation. So this is not a circumstance where if it's dismissed, it's over. That is not what will happen. If the case is dismissed, it's not necessarily over. You can maintain sort of supervision over her, and if at any point she becomes competent, you can recharge her and try the case. As we said, competency can change, and just because you're incompetent, that does not relieve you of responsibility for the crime. So having an indictment dismissed because of incompetency is a very different thing. If you had one dismissed because of prosecutorial misconduct or any number of other things that might actually prevent the indictment from being brought again. And it also doesn't mean she's necessarily going to get out. As we said at the very beginning of this episode, she has been committed civilly before. It is likely that if she is released from custody as a result of these criminal charges, that a civil commitment order will be entered very quickly. And I don't even know that she would actually leave the hospital she's in. Civil commitment, as we said, it's a complicated thing. There's a lot of different determinations you have to make. But given what we have going on here, I think she would definitely be eligible for that. So we'll just have to see exactly what happens and exactly how this goes. It is legally a very interesting case. Really just pushes the boundaries of competency and how it needs to be evaluated. So it'll be interesting to see what the judge says. I think he's probably going to find her incompetent. I think without some doctor saying that she's totally faking it and she's competent, I don't think he will be brave enough or foolish enough, whichever one you think it is, to say she's nevertheless competent.
I mean, it's really open to appeal if he, goes on a record that is contrary to every expert that comes before him. It's a hard call to make, to allow it. It probably would be immediately appealed, and she may never get to trial based on the record. So it's just hard. It's hard when there are ways to game the system. But those of you who may be thinking, well, then everyone could game the system. But the thing is, like, being in a psychiatric hold is not fun. I mean, she is in prison in some senses. She has no freedom to go out. She's not in shackles, and she's not actually behind, in a cell or anything, but she's not free to go. She's not free to live her life. And yet she would prefer that to proving her innocence at trial, for example, if what she says to her family is in fact what she said, that she's better off being held on the psychiatric incompetency than facing trial. That says a lot about at least her mental state in terms of what she believes her culpability is. And I don't know. We'll see. I mean, like Brett said, we will find out an answer sooner rather than later. I hope that there's some break in the case that can also show that she is competent and that she maybe has a history of, or she told this plan of malingering to other people. Maybe she's told a friend, I've been committed before. No one's going to charge me for murder because I can just pretend to be crazy again. That would be great. If she ever said that to you, report it, please. So anyways, this is such a sad story because, like we said, we have no idea where these children are.
And on that note, as we said, think back, if you live in this area, to 2014. The children, the last time they were seen, Sarah was wearing a pink dress and Jacob had a green shirt and blue checkered shorts. As I said, we will post a photograph of the kids wearing those clothes, the actual clothes they were wearing the day they disappeared. In addition to that, there were two vehicles that she was driving. When she took Sarah, she was driving a silver 2007 Nissan Rogue. And when she took Jacob, she was driving a blue-gray 2004 Chrysler Town and Country, which is like a minivan type car. Like I said, we're going to post these things, pictures of these vehicles, pictures of the kids. If you lived in the area, rack your brain. Did you see anything really strange with a mom and two kids that day? It would be fantastic if some indication of these children was ever found. I realize that's asking a lot of you, but just try and think about it if you live in this area. And it would be great if we could give this family some sort of closure here, even as the legal issue rolls on. It's easy to get lost in Catherine and all of her issues when you talk about this case, but this case is really about Sarah and Jacob, and that's who we want to remember, and that's who we want to bring home. If you have any thoughts about this, shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, @prosecutorspod. Hello to those of you watching on YouTube, and hello to those of you listening to this episode early and ad-free on Zoom. I was about to say on Zoom because we've been recording with our patrons on Zoom. We're not doing that today, so they're missing out. But we enjoyed doing that with you guys, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. And as always, continue to tell your friends. If every one of you told one friend, there's no telling how far this show could go. So keep evangelizing for us and keep leaving those 5-star reviews. Well, Alice, before we sign off, is there anything else you want to add?
No, except that, I hope someone does remember something. And thank you guys for bringing cases like this to our attention, especially when it's such a timely issue. And we will update you when we know more at the end of this year.
Yeah, thank you, Mandy, for recommending this. This is a great case. And maybe not only can we cover it, but maybe some other people will cover it as well. Well, that is all we have for today. We will be back next week with a twist. I'll just say it's an oldie but a goodie. and I think you'll enjoy it. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
ribeyes for a year, plus $10 off at butcherbox.com/prosecute with code prosecute. Man, ribeyes.
I may have to sign up for that
deal. Ribeyes
Three
are like
ribeyes
delicious.
for a year? I mean,
Okay.
First it was like bacon, which was good.
Which was
It
good. And it was
like,
ground beef,
bacon
which is
good.
also
Then ground
good.
beef, which is also good.
But now we're
And then
just
a turkey,
stepping it
which is like,
up.
But now ribeyes?
I know,
Wow.
right? Like pretty soon
Right.
they're just gonna throw in like a scoop of caviar with everything.
A whole cow. Yeah.
A whole cow.
Did I not divide these up for the rest of the way?
I guess not.
I guess I'm not. Let's just go back and forth. Is that okay?
I love it.
Sorry.
No.
Just stopped, I guess. That was not very good.
It's kind of funny. I like it.
Okay, you ready to go then?
Oh yeah, I couldn't be more ready.
All month long on PlutoTV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, PlutoTV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows. Available on live and on demand. Download the free PlutoTV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.